Well, thank you very much, Xavier, and it is my pleasure to introduce my very good friend, the Honourable Eric Abetz, I think who most appropriately is going to deliver this inaugural Sir David Smith memorial oration. Eric, I think, is well known as a great champion of his home state of Tasmania. He never shuts up about it. He was a very long-serving former Liberal senator for Tasmania, and he served as a minister in the Howard and Abetz governments and is now a leading political Conservative. He does now serve as chairman of the Australian Monarchist League's Central Campaign Committee, on which I serve with him, and is a prominent Conservative commentator. He practised as a barrister and solicitor prior to entering Parliament in 1994, and he's a great immigrant success story, having come to Australia as a child when his family emigrated to Australia from Germany in 1961. I first came across Eric in 1978 when he was president of the Australian Liberal Students' Federation, and I was a shit kicker at the Federal Secretariat of the Liberal Party in Canberra. He went on to become president of the Tasmanian division of the Liberal Party in 1990, and at that time I was state director of the South Australian Liberal Party. So we, again, had a lot to do with each other. He was appointed to the Senate in February of 1994 when he filled a casual vacancy created by the resignation of Brian Archer, and they're all called Archer, as you know, in Tasmania. I'd been a senator myself for only 7 months when Eric joined our coalition Senate team in Canberra, and he very quickly became an integral part of our Conservative grouping in the Senate. We don't have factions, as you know, but we did have a little group of Conservatives, which Eric very quickly became an honoured member of. And his maiden speech in that year laid out his Conservative credentials when he emphasised his commitment to federalism, the family, and our great Australian constitutional monarchy. Indeed, he said in that speech, now, I'm sorry to say, Eric, nearly 30 years ago, that, and I quote, "I believe in and will defend the fundamentals of our constitutional structures which have served Australia so well for nearly a century." And he's certainly done that over the last 30 years. His dedication to the defence of our Constitution has been amply demonstrated throughout his public service. His term as a senator ended only last year in 2022 after 28 years and 4 months. And by my calculation, he's the third longest serving Tasmanian senator since Federation. Eric and I served together in the Howard ministry, and indeed when I was Finance Minister, Eric was my junior minister for 4 years as the Special Minister of State, and in my view, easily the best Special Minister of State in the Howard government over that 12 years. And the Special Minister of State has a special role. He's the Minister for the re-election of the government. So Eric was very important. And after we lost office in 2007, I went from being government leader to opposition leader in the Senate, and I was delighted when our Senate colleagues elected Eric as my deputy. In opposition, we elect our Senate leaders. In government, of course, it's the prerogative of the Prime Minister. And Eric served me loyally in that role until I stood down in 2010, and Eric was then elected to take my place as leader. His loyalty was on full display when he joined me in resigning from Malcolm Turnbull's shadow cabinet following Malcolm's insistence that the coalition support Kevin Rudd's then so-called carbon pollution reduction scheme legislation. You might recall that occasion. And then Eric played a key part with the rest of what I might call the Conservative grouping in the party in ensuring that Tony Abbott replaced Malcolm as the Liberal leader in 2009, and you can wear that as a badge of honour, Eric. His wonderful record of public service and staunch defence of our constitutional monarchy make Eric the ideal choice, in my view, to deliver the inaugural Sir David Smith memorial oration. So please welcome the Honourable Eric Abetz.
It is not only right and proper, it is indeed an essential service in preserving the history of our nation to salute the service and memory of one who served his country with exceptional diligence and great integrity during one of the most difficult chapters of our constitutional history. In honouring Sir David Smith's life in an annual Sir David Smith Oration, the Samuel Griffith Society has done the Australian people a great service in providing an opportunity for genuine truth-telling about our masterfully crafted constitution and its smooth operation in exceptionally trying times, whilst honouring one of its own, a founding member and former president no less. The oration will also provide an opportunity to showcase the characteristics of a gold standard public servant to whom all entering that vital sphere of administration might aspire. That said, it's a singular honour to have been invited to deliver the inaugural Sir David Smith Oration. My only hesitation in considering the invitation was, how does one honour such an outstanding Australian in a single speech? The good news is that future contributors to this oration will be able to add to the historical record and cover any omissions. But for two bulls of Australian politics doing mortal battle in 1975, we may never have known much about Sir David's contribution to our nation's life, and chances are he would not have written a book about which more will be said later. The two bulls to whom I refer were men towering in physical stature, with egos to match, and with a determination to keep or gain power not before witnessed in Australian politics. One a Prime Minister who sought to govern without supply, and another who, some may say, was in an indecent haste to claim the government of the country. The Parliament was in deadlock, the Prime Minister controlling the numbers in the House and the opposition leader in the Senate, providing a parliamentary gridlock or stalemate. To use an Australian rules football analogy, these two players had the ball of Australian democracy locked in between them in what commentators would call a hard ball get. To further the Aussie rules analogy, a melee had begun to form and the ball was not about to emerge for the game to continue. In those circumstances, the umpire blows the whistle and bounces the ball to allow the game to continue. That is what our constitutional umpire did on the 11th of November 1975, and with that, Sir David's visage appeared on every TV screen and in every newspaper. On that day, Sir David became a household name. He read the Governor-General's proclamation dissolving both houses of Parliament, not dismissing the government, but more about that later. The events of Remembrance Day 1975 have generated much heat, but not much light, and have seen gallons of ink spilt without much coherence in many of the scribblings which ensued. In that void, Sir David made a thoughtful, right-minded contribution to the public discourse, not only from the insider's vantage point, but with a poise and wisdom of stepping back and providing as objective an assessment for which one could wish. But first, what of the person Sir David Isa Smith KCVO AO, a son of migrants who made their way in the world through sheer hard work? He was born in 1933 and served our nation as a public servant from 1953 to 1990, some 37 years. Sir David embarked on a public service career while studying at university. His move through the ranks was rapid, being promoted on those now out-of-fashion, rare and much disregarded metrics of capacity and performance, culminating in his appointment as the official secretary to the Governor-General. His is the career which gives public servants a good name. On the way through, he was the recipient of many honours, including being appointed a Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, an Officer of the Order of Australia, and in a private ceremony was knighted by Her Majesty as a Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order. On receiving notice of this high honour, necessitating travel to London, David, as he still was then, told his children the Queen wanted to see him to make a lady out of their mother. An insight into his humour. As to the knighthood, Sir David saw it not so much as a personal accolade, but an opportunity to draw attention to the cause. A doyen of Australian public life, Sir Paul Hasluck, enthusiastically said in 1992 that one of the wisest decisions of his public life was to appoint David Smith as the official secretary, an assessment with which the last Governor-General whom he served concurred. On the occasion of Sir David's retirement, the Honourable Bill Hayden referred to characteristics of professionalism, faithfulness, loyalty, propriety and zealousness with which he protected the independence and integrity of the Governor-General, the sort of accolades we would all wish to have spoken on our retirement. Not done with his lifetime of contribution as an exemplary public servant, Sir David devoted much of his retirement to correcting the false narratives which were proliferating about the events of Remembrance Day 1975. His well-articulated and reasoned interventions at the Constitutional Convention in 1998 as an appointed delegate were nothing short of superb, outdoing many a QC and others allegedly learned in the law. I reflect as to whether he might have been the best High Court judge or Chief Justice Australia never had. A masterpiece which should be compulsory reading for every student of Australia's history and anyone seeking to understand constitutional law is the seminal work of his entitled Head of State, the Governor-General, the Monarchy, the Republic and the Dismissal. Upon reading his work, it is clear that many a Professor, King's Counsel and indeed Chief Justice are exposed as not being as learned in the law as they may have thought or projected themselves. Laden with gems, facts and unassailable propositions, this 358-page work remains as relevant today as when first published in 2005. The meticulous research with which the reader is regaled in his book makes it the go-to authoritative treatise on our arrangements vis-à-vis the head of state and the role of the monarch and our independence as a nation from any interference from the United Kingdom. In defending our constitutional monarchy, Sir David masterfully, comprehensively and persuasively not only clips the wings of the would-be Republicans, but plucks them of their very last feather. Take, for example, the assertion that Australia is not an independent country and still subject to the dictates from London, as is still being falsely asserted by some Republicans. Sir David rightly cites a distinguished Tasmanian, there are some, Andrew Inglis Clark, and who said as early as 1900 that the Governor-General's authority stemmed from the Constitution itself, not the monarch, and, as such, the monarch could not direct the incumbent in the performance of his constitutional duties. Indeed, Sir David reminds us that special legislation was needed in 1953 to empower Her Majesty to undertake some of the functions of the Governor-General during her visit. To clarify this for good, in 1984 the letters patent were further amended to confirm the Clark position espoused some 84 years earlier. The Australia Act in 1986 also purported to do the same, and in 1988 the Hawke government appointed Constitutional Commission on which Gough Whitlam sat unanimously wrote, although the Governor-General is the Queen's representative in Australia, the Governor-General is in no sense a delegate of the Queen. The Commission also wrote that at some time between 1926 and the end of World War II, Australia had achieved full independence as a sovereign state of the world, and the development of Australian nationhood does not require any change to the Australian Constitution. One could ask, rhetorically of course, what is it about Gough Whitlam's own words that the Republicans do not understand? Yet interestingly, those that decry the possibility of the monarch being involved in Australian politics were the very ones who sought to appeal to the monarch during the events of 1975 to so intervene and do exactly that. In response to that request made by the then Speaker of the House, Her Majesty's Private Secretary advised, "The Queen has no part in the decisions which the Governor-General must take in accordance with the Constitution. It would not be proper for her to interfere in person in matters which are so clearly placed within the jurisdiction of the Governor-General." As Sir David so neatly summarises the situation, that surely puts an end to all doubts about where Australian sovereignty lies. It should have, but it didn't. The Republicans continue to make their loud noises, hoping their decibels drown out the facts and precedents which debunk their myth-peddling. A full paragraph from Sir David's treatise neatly sums up the role of our Australian Governor-General. He says, "Under our constitutional monarchy, the Crown symbolises the Australian system of government. The powers, duties and functions of the head of state are carried out by an Australian who holds the appointed office of Governor-General. Unlike an elected president, a Governor-General comes to that high office without having to seek it and without having to defeat others to attain it or retain it. As a result, an appointed Governor-General is able to represent national unity in a way that no elected president would be able to do. For an appointed Governor-General has no political constituency to represent and no supporters to reward, has no mandate to discharge, and provides no alternative power base to that of the elected Prime Minister." A clear, concise and considered summary. But knowing the minds of the Republicans, who often rely on the Irish model of a parliamentary system with an elected president, Sir David helpfully footnotes the campaign comments made by Mary Robinson in 1990 when she said, "As President directly elected by the people, I will have the most democratic job in the country. I'll be able to look the Prime Minister in the eye and tell him to back off if necessary, because I have been directly elected by the people as a whole and he hasn't." Competing mandates lead to conflict and gridlock, as witnessed regularly across the Pacific, and from time to time right here in Australia as well, between our two houses of Parliament. Does Australia really want to insert a third power player into the mix with reference to a democratic mandate? Sir David's response to that question does not need to be guessed. One of the rare departures from Sir David's clinical and forensic analysis of the Constitution and its workings is when he allows himself to venture into vibe territory, but with a fraction more depth than our learned friend Mr. Denuto of the Castle fame. In speaking of our late Queen, Sir David made this observation: "For several generations of Australians, the Queen is more than just a word in our Constitution, important though that is. For many of us, the monarchy was an important symbol during the Second World War, and we associated then, as we associated today, with the embodiment of a sense of duty and with the acceptance of responsibility, as well as with democratic parliamentary government under the Crown." There is no doubt that this departure of Sir David's approach and reference to the Second World War was in large part, if not exclusively, because of the horrors of that war and the profound evil it overcame, an evil which saw many members of Sir David's extended family meet an end which the world can never allow to be repeated. Sir David's father left Poland with his parents and thus escaped the horrors which later befell most of the extended family. But with no hint of entitlement, Sir David's father would often reflect on the privilege he had been given to be allowed to come to Australia, and how the son of a penniless Jew could become the official secretary to the Governor-General. Indeed, a common theme amongst refugees and migrants to this country is that Australia is a blessed country to have its unique constitutional monarchy, which has ensured our longevity as one of the world's longest-running democracies. But that blessing will not simply continue in perpetuity because Australians were given a brilliant constitution. It will only continue if there are enough of our fellow Australians who understand it and are willing to defend it, which is why the excellent work of the Samuel Griffith Society is so vitally important in reminding all of us about the constitutional excellence we have inherited and providing some intellectual horsepower and research into the public domain, to which Sir David has so powerfully contributed. As someone who had the portrait of Sir John Kerr hanging in his office for many years, Sir David's reflections on Remembrance Day were of particular interest. Not only is Sir John to be admired for what he did on that day, but his portrait's presence provided a very quick and unfailing political litmus test, as the smiles and snarls the portrait elicited saved me the need to ask where certain people lined up on the political spectrum. But turning to the dismissal itself, we are given a thoroughly researched piece of history intertwined with extensive extracts of the established and accepted wisdom of the day, which was laced with many inconvenient truths for one lot of the protagonists. Chapter 10 opens the dismissal discussion with a quote from Dr. Abetz, who in 1939 told us, without any pushback, that, so far as Australia is concerned, a long course of practice tends to negative the proposition that the Governor-General is a mere automaton in the hands of ministers who have lost or are about to lose the support of Parliament. A very apt quote from a Labor luminary. And on the other issue as to the Senate rejecting or deferring money bills, the accepted advice of the Senate clerk was quoted, informing the reader that any contention that there is a convention that the Senate should not defer or reject money bills is insupportable. Such was and has been the misreporting of the events of the dismissal that Sir David found himself saying, no event in Australian political history has received so much inaccurate and misleading coverage. There are many contenders for second place, but the observation remains true. The inaccuracies about the dismissal abound in their egregiousness and number. The idea that the effective operation of the Constitution, allowing the people through the ballot box to resolve a parliamentary impasse, is a coup, is one quick look into the hyperventilation and hyperbole in which far too many have engaged. In fact, the manner in which the matter was resolved highlighted the enduring quality of our system of government, not any weakness. As Sir David tells us, the events put our system of government to the most extreme test, but the system worked and the process of public administration did not miss a beat. As to the preposterous proposition that money bills are not to be deferred or rejected in the Australian Senate, we have provided a full list of quotes from those that justified such action when they tried and failed, courtesy of Sir David's research. The most powerful of the quotes come from a Labor Senate leader and later High Court Judge, Lionel Murphy, who in 1967 told the Senate, "There is no tradition, as has been suggested, that the Senate will not use its constitutional power whenever it considers it necessary or desirable to do so in the public interest." Some years later, to make the point again, Senator Murphy tabled a list of 169 occasions on which Labor sought to defeat money bills in the Senate. And if Lionel Murphy was not sufficiently authoritative for the reader, Sir David quotes none other than the dismissed Prime Minister Whitlam in a former manifestation as Leader of the Opposition when he said, "Any government which is defeated by the Parliament on a major taxation bill should resign. This bill will be defeated in another place. The government should then resign." The mild, professional, proper and exceptionally fair-minded Sir David gives us a clear clinical insight into his views about the dismissal when he asks 10 devastating questions which he invites Mr Whitlam to answer toward the end of his book. Set out in bullet point form, they actually are bullets, albeit in a literary sense, which shoot down the Whitlam mythology, hitting the bullseye one after the other. And in case there be a reader suffering an obtuseness of mind, he follows the 10 questions with the following exhortation. I suggest that instead of continuing to strut the national stage as the wrong legendary hero of Australian politics, it's time, Mr Whitlam said sorry to his party for being such a failure as leader. It's time he said sorry to the Australian people for being such a failure as Prime Minister, and it's time he told the truth about the events of 1975. Sir David's threefold use of the term "it's time" did not go unnoticed, and one suspects might be a play on Mr Whitlam's campaign slogan of 1972, "One wonders." Friends, the contribution of Sir David Smith has been recognised in many forms, even if not by the partisans and rage maintainers, with awards and accolades. Deserved and valued though such awards are, they are ultimately of less value in comparison to keeping alive the memory of the outstanding work and contribution of Sir David's life in an annual oration reminding future generations of the truth of the matter surrounding the events of 1975 and the robustness and soundness of our uniquely Australian design constitutional arrangements, which have a constitutional monarchy designed and devoted to the protection of our democracy and the Australian people from the excesses of politicians. This oration salutes Sir David Smith, who, to use a Yiddish term for an outstanding individual, was a mensch. Sir David was a great Australian whose work needs to be immortalised and passed from generation to generation. The annual Sir David Smith Memorial Oration will serve exactly that purpose, and I wish it well.
I'm going to ask Eric to stay there. That was an excellent oration, but I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm going to invite Richard and Michael to come up and do that for us. I think they've got a presentation they'd like to make to you, Eric.
Hi, I promise I'll be quick. Thanks, Xavier. Dad always sent me copies of his papers, speeches, writings, and boy, there were plenty. He had enormous energy, and I was proud, not just of the position he took, but that he so relentlessly, and it has to be said stoically, prosecuted his beliefs through various media and forums. Beliefs not based on opinion, but grounded in truth. He had a total commitment to accuracy and was determined not to let a good story get in the way of the facts. In recent years, it's true that he had slowed down a little, So when Xavier contacted me about instigating this oration, I took the opportunity to go back and reacquaint myself with his and others' papers to the Society and elsewhere. It struck me that not only is this a wonderful honour, for which the family is immensely grateful and proud, and my brothers and I thank the Society most sincerely for that, it will hopefully also cause others to do what I did, go back and look. Those who knew Dad well would be aware that he never wanted attention on himself, but I think it's fair to say that he reluctantly recognised that his profile gave him a degree of credibility to, or at least interest in his views, and that he saw it as his duty not to waste that opportunity. He especially embraced opportunities to talk to school children in the hope of sparking an interest that might make them less susceptible to misinformation and manipulation by unscrupulous politicians or media, and sadly their teachers. He would be so proud but very humbled that there will be this lasting legacy of this annual oration in his name, and pleased about its potential positive impact. I especially want to mention the inaugural speaker. Not unlike Dad, Eric's contribution to the discourse extends well beyond his achievements in public office. And I can think of none better to have been chosen to speak today. It's pretty obvious from your speech, Eric, that you've at least read Dad's book, and you probably have a copy somewhere. But on behalf of the family, I'm very pleased to be able to present you with a copy.
Well, I'm going to be even briefer. Dad, as everyone has said before me, really wished for compliments and recognition for himself, but he did have a bit of a devilish sense of humour, and he enjoyed setting the record straight. So I can understand that that's what happens here a great deal. I can see that. And looking back through the 11 papers that he delivered to this society over the years, he certainly went about that with that passion. I want to thank the Society for establishing this oration, and thank Eric for your wonderful words and for reading the book. So, Dad pestered all of us for a long time to read the book, and not being students of politics, it didn't come that easily, but I'm awfully glad I did. Thanks again.